and welcome to a new episode of Wrestling with Memories. I'm Fash, the $1 Million Fan, and as ever, I'm joined by Wax, the Brain Hussein. I'm sitting in the Wrestling with Memories cave. Wax in his usual location of the brainstorming sessions that he does in the pad there. Wax, we are at an episode today that I know you've been looking forward to since we started this podcast. It's the journey of a man to get to the top of the pinnacle, and it's something that none of us at the time, no wrestling fan, expected to happen. But today we're going to go back into the October of 1992, where a big bombshell was dropped, and a man who had been a great servant to the WWF was given the ultimate prize.
Yeah, I think there is no doubt about it. Bret Hart was my favourite wrestler of all time and still is to this day. If I look back at anybody's career that I followed very closely, it was Bret Hart number one. And I think for many people, especially if you're British or European, Bret Hart would have been your number one wrestler in the sort of 90s era, and even going back into the late 80s as well. He had a distinguished career with the WWF. But yeah, I can't wait to talk through how we got to this point. You know, how was it that Bret Hart was the chosen one out of all people, and why did it come out of nowhere? What was the reason behind this change?
So we are, Wax. I mean, the whole point around it being a big bombshell wasn't just the fact that who won the title, but in our last episode we just talked about the first shock of Ric Flair beating the Macho Man Randy Savage in an untelevised match a few days after SummerSlam. You're thinking at this point that Ric Flair, now as a two-time champion, this is going to prolong. We'd also said in that episode, and you can check out in the archives, that it's very much signposted as we're now going to have the Ultimate Warrior going after Ric Flair's title. The main event of Survivor Series is announced. It's going to be the Ultimate Maniacs, and we are going to cover them in detail in our next episode. But it's going to be Ultimate Warrior and the Macho Man versus Ric Flair, who's the champion at that point, and Razor Ramon. So you can see that, as we said, these two big feuds. But then, as we get into October, everything is going to change, and that leads us to this moment on the 12th of October, where an impromptu title match is announced. And once again, this is untelevised, and to this day, it hasn't been, officially shown in full form. But we'll talk about that in a bit. But just your thoughts in terms of, initially we've just talked about one surprise: Flair's the champion, Plan B's worked, but now, a month later, everything's been thrown into disarray.
It's crazy, isn't it? We talk about 92 being such a seminal year for the WWF and our sort of, watching on TV. And you're right. How could you go from one man in Macho Man losing the title to Ric Flair, and then suddenly a month later, you got this guy coming into the world title picture who was nowhere to be seen in terms of, that rank. We had seen Bret Hart up to now being, very much an intercontinental champion, a middle of the road sort of guy. At least that's the way he was billed all the way up to this point. And suddenly to make a decision out of the blue to pick this man of all people on your roster to be the one to take them forward it's a bit crazy if you think about it. Like,
it's bizarre. Yeah, it's
bizarre. It's crazy. It takes a lot of guts to make a decision like this as well. So, you're changing complete direction and who you're going with. But, I'd love to take a little look at, just how Bret got to this stage even before the title opportunity. And, I don't want to go into a lot of detail on this because obviously he's had a very long, distinguished career even up to this point. Interesting to note in 92, around about this time, he was 35 years old, so not a young guy here, very much had a tenured career, is very much approaching what most people would consider towards the end of a career at this time of year, at this time of era, like Ric Flair, Macho Man really wrestling into their 40s and really probably thinking about calling it a day at that point. But if we go back to the very beginning, obviously.
But sorry, just if I can interject there before you go in. But to us, as perception, because of the way he'd been positioned, as you say, he still came across as one of the younger guys, even though he debuted in 1984. To us, he's that kind of young, British Bulldog, Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels, others emerging. So the point you make is actually very interesting, the fact that he was 35 here and a veteran of a number of years, but we didn't really perceive him as that back here.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a good point. And similar to a lot of people in that sort of IC division, like, Shawn Michaels, British Bulldog, who you've mentioned, we do think of them as young guys, but actually, they're all probably getting on in age. Maybe not so much Shawn Michaels, but certainly Bulldog and Bret Hart.
They've been around for a long time, as you say, in Stampede and then then in the WWF. But yeah, give us a little bit of an overview. I mean, diehard Bret Hart fans, as you say, huge in Europe, huge in Canada, of course, a living legend there. But
Yeah.
what about a bit of a synopsis of the career up to this point?
Well, we all know Bret Hart is part of this prestigious wrestling family from Calgary, Alberta, run by Stu Hart and his family.
The family is run by Stu Hart.
Well, the family is run by
family.
Stu Hart, but what I was going to refer to was Stampede Wrestling, the promotion run by the Harts, really managed by Stu Hart and Helen. Going back to 50s, 60s, the stories about they used to put on these crazy sort of carnival type wrestling shows. They used to have a wrestling bear on the show as well that Stu Hart used to fight up against, and later on,
you can't make this up. You can't
exactly.
Make this up.
There's a really large family. I can't remember the exact number of kids that Stu and Helen had, but we're talking about 7 or 8
12.
kids.
I think it was 12.
It was 12 kids. There you go. 12 kids and all their grandchildren later on in life, but a lot of them associated with the wrestling business one way or another. A lot of the brothers wrestling, a lot of the girls having married wrestlers, or even taking part in the backstage drama. And Bret Hart very much a pivotal part of Stampede Wrestling. And he had a couple of famous feuds, especially with Tom Billington, who we know is the Dynamite Kid, and who would have his own great career, and obviously cut short later on. But that early part was just very much spent in Calgary, in Canada, a few trips abroad in Japan, wrestling there as well. And is maturing very quickly up in Canada, and eventually joins the WWF at actually the age of 27 in 1984. So again, not a really young guy. Like, today when WWF signed someone, they're really looking for that young potential superstar. But at this time, he's 27. He joins in mid-80s when it's the land of the giants, and he's not really got that look about him at that time.
But this was also the time where Vince McMahon was basically hoovering up all the other promotions, right? This is the beginning of the big expansion that would really come into play in 1985 with WrestleMania. Hulk Hogan's going to win the championship from the Iron Sheik. So really at this point, as you say, Vince is either buying territories or he's bringing the top stars over. And he had a good relationship with Stampede. So I think he may have made an offer for them. I remember reading back in the day, but, Stu wasn't selling, but he was able to then, migrate some of his best talent to the WWF. So as you say, it's the land of the giants. It's going to be the cartoon era of wrestling, but, likes of Bret Hart are being brought in alongside many others to really make this roster incredible, really, when you see the depth of it.
Yeah, and the mid to late 80s, the WWF had a great tag team division. And, foremost amongst them, I always thought was the Hart Foundation, as one of the top tag teams. And funnily enough, they started off Bret, the Hitman Hart, and Jim the Anvil Neidhart as heels, really, with Jimmy Hart as their manager, and, spent a good couple of years wrestling as heels all around the country. But I think they very much quickly picked up upon Bret's look and that sort of appeal to, young children and ladies generally, and just that whole pink and black look that the Hart Foundation had. I thought was always really cool.
Well, that's the thing, going back to it, Wax, just interjecting. I mean, obviously, when they came in, they brought in Neidhart as an individual star, I think managed by Jimmy Hart. They brought in Bret Hart initially with 2 T's for the Bret, and he was supposed to be a cowboy gimmick, which I think may have lasted for taping or not. Bret didn't want to do it, so they're separate. But then I think it may have been Bret's idea to say, look, you've got Jimmy Hart, you've got me, Neidhart, names are similar.
Yep.
He's obviously said Neidhart's his brother-in-law. I don't know if he was at the stage or not, but once again, he came through Stampede. So they were put together, as you say, as this tag team. Initially, they didn't have the pink and black, as you say. I remember WrestleMania 2, they had the kind of turquoise look, and I think they played a bit with it, but then suddenly, I think it might have been Bret again that came across the kind of black and pink looking quite unique. And that was it. And as you say, from there, they're in the races as a tag team that is a heel tag team, but one that's gunning for the tag team championships.
Yeah, so I mean, over that late 80s run, they would have 2 tag team championship runs, one beating the British Bulldogs in 1987, and then later, a couple of years later, beating Demolition, the fake version of Demolition, in 1990. But Fash, give me your overall opinion of the Hart Foundation, because I mean, when we were growing up, they were certainly an iconic tag team, if not maybe the best tag team of that era. But give me your thoughts.
Yeah, so this is, I think we might have touched on this before, but for me, even though now you appreciate it and you were a big fan of the Hart Foundation when you watched the old stuff, I was never a huge fan, and I don't know why. Even though technically they were great, I was more of the kind of character-driven wrestling fan at this point. So I was preferring Demolition, and even I didn't like Demolition turning heel. I've mentioned in in archives. And at this point, you still had Axter in this 2 out of 3 falls match you're referring to at SummerSlam 90. But I was a Demolition guy. I was a LOD guy. Not so much the Rockers and the Hart Foundation. So for me, I was never a huge fan. I like the look. I like, the combination looked unique, but not a big fan. But when, you see their matches, be it against the Bulldogs, be it against the Brainbusters, Demolition, and other matches with the Rockers that we've talked about in our archives as well. Always great matches and a unique tag team. But at the time, I've got to be honest, I wasn't a huge fan compared to the other kind of more character-driven tag teams. So when they became the champions, obviously we were watching retrospectively, but I wasn't really that. But I just wanted the LOD to be champions as soon as they could when they entered. And before that, I was a big Demolition fan going back when I was watching wrestling from earlier than when we started watching it live. But I know you were. I mean, from your perspective, I think I do remember you being a fan of Bret, and then anything else you'd watch retrospectively of Bret and Anvil.
Yeah,
way more than I was.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been a fan of anything related to Bret Hart. So I was a big fan of Jim the Anvil Neidhart, and I thought the pairing was actually really good as well. And it worked, the power of the Anvil and the technique of Bret Hart.
And I think you and your brother as well, your younger brother used to copy Jim's Neidhart's laugh. And I remember you being a tag team many times when we used to have these tag team tournaments. So certainly I remember you boys definitely being big marks for Bret and the Hart Foundation at that point. But Wax, I mean, in terms of, I say, he's got this tag team run, but a few times he was also going into during this period, and we'll maybe talk about his top moments before he won this match. But there's a few times during that period where Vince was trying them as singles as well, but it was kind of really half-hearted. And the memory that I have, the first one is a tape that was our second event, I think, that we rented, that we shared from our shop. We talked about WrestleMania 4, and there was this 20-man battle royal that kicked it off. And that was my first real memory of Bret Hart. And I really liked what he did in that match and the memory that I still have. So if you remember it, and I'm sure you do, it's a battle royal. In it, he's a heel. Him and Bad News Brown become allies at the end. They eliminate Junkyard Dog, and then they think they're going to share the title. But Bad News Brown, being Stone Cold before there was a Stone Cold, double crosses him, throws him out. And then do you remember the moment after where Bret Hart takes the trophy and just smashes it to pieces? And I remember that being my first memory of Bret Hart.
And that really turned him from a heel to a face almost,
It was, because then they kind of had this program, and I think that program in a sense was a catalyst for the Hart Foundation turning babyface, because Jimmy Hart didn't want it, and Jim Neidhart was sporting Bret. But I was just kind of half doing some, single stuff, but still very much a tag team. And they kind of did this a few times. Even during these title reigns, which was a little bit odd. So Vince was testing the waters despite having this tried and tested combination.
And I think probably what didn't help Bret Hart is that he's not really a character wrestler as such. He's very much portraying himself. Whereas, somebody who's got a character or a cartoonish character even would do a lot better in terms in front of an audience, especially in the late 80s, early 90s era. But despite that, I mean, we move into 91, and really this is where we see Bret Hart really coming into his own and getting involved in the Intercontinental sort of title division. And we talked a lot about this in our archive, so do check it out. But probably the highlight of that year for him was his match against Mr. Perfect at SummerSlam. And that match we talked about, being a 4 or 5 star match, really well done, really well executed by both guys. And Bret wins his first Intercontinental title of, who was a very heelish Mr. Perfect at that time.
And a very established Mr. Perfect, right? A guy with a streak. So this was really Bret's coming out party. As you see, we've covered it in our review of SummerSlam 91. And that was the moment, he's the Hart Foundation have lost the tag team titles to the Nasty Boys. Now they are separate. Jim Neidhart is going to go be a commentator for a bit, and then he's going to team up with Owen Hart before getting fired. Bret's going to be on this journey, but a very quick journey to this title match. As you say, it's not really hyped up, but then you get there and it's this classic match with his parents and the audience, and it's just a great moment, and that's him. But Wax, that was the beginning, but that's not the end really for him, because there's a few other classic matches leading up to this.
He has a good run with the Mountie, one of the characters that I loved but you hated, really cementing him as a champion until he sort of loses that title to the Mountie again off TV. I think it wasn't it, Fashion? We talked about this in our archives, and the reason behind it, him potentially moving to WCW. I don't want to recover old ground, but do check out our archives. But I mean, it was a stellar year if you think from that match with Mr. Perfect from SummerSlam 91. then you go into WrestleMania against Roddy Piper, another excellent match with an excellent finish. He regains the Intercontinental Championship there, gets the rub from, a legend in Roddy Piper. And then, he holds the title pretty much from there on till SummerSlam. And again, he's putting on a clinic with the British Bulldog, and we talked about that very recently in our SummerSlam 92 episode. So very much building his career based on being an excellent worker, if not being, one of these gimmick wrestlers. And that really maybe set him apart from a lot of people.
Yeah, it's definitely the Workers' Championship, wasn't it? The Intercontinental title. But as you say, where they were quite good with this was the backstory to Bret Hart a little bit. So we're talking about that title win, the Intercontinental win. You got his parents there, they're telling some of the backstory, which was probably one of the few outside of Randy Savage and Elizabeth a little bit, where they're talking about, the person. As you say, he is Bret the Hitman Hart. He's not a character. He's not larger than life. He's not a Warrior or a Hogan. He's not even a Randy Savage in terms of the charisma, but there's a story behind this guy and there's a history, and I think there's respect developing. But as you say, it's just that stellar match with perfect Piper Bulldog, and maybe the Bulldog match, and the fact that was the last match in the work that he pulled off there. It was the final moment that was needed for Vince McMahon to start rethinking his strategy. But I mean, in terms of I think we could both agree that those three matches be Bret Hart's top three moments leading into this. But in terms of two other moments, I've kind of given you one. For me, that Bad News Brown situation where he's kind of, he goes berserk, and you're kind of seeing another side of him. And then going back and looking at things, I would probably say it would be a toss between the second tag team title win or really what I remember seeing afterwards and thinking, okay, Bret Hart's a great worker, is Survivor Series 1990, where it's known, the match that Bret was in is known for the debut of The Undertaker. But actually, the last part of that match is him and Ted DiBiase putting on a very short wrestling clinic, and Ted DiBiase wins. But in that, you see how good Bret Hart is. And I remember watching that and thinking, okay, this guy's, you could see at this point he was special. But is there any other moments that come to your mind?
Yeah, that tag team match against Demolition was one.
It was a great match,
there was another moment, and I didn't actually go back and look at it, but there was a moment of him on primetime doing some painting, and I can't remember now whether this was before or after the championship. I'm pretty sure it was before. He's doing some painting on the show, and the Nasty Boys appear, and they get into a little bit of an argument, and he throws paint over them. Them and Jimmy Hart. So I thought that was quite funny.
And everybody knows Bret Hart's a great artist, right? So if you bought the wrestling magazines back in the day, you'd
we've got a Bret Hart fan coming into the we've got Wrestling with Memories office.
The Bret Hart to your Stu Hart wax.
Yeah,
it's the debut. The debut of your son. We believe in nepotism here at Wrestling with Memories. Are you going to be his mouthpiece, or is he going to speak for himself?
He's certainly not going to speak for himself, but I think he's here just to cause havoc.
Well, this is our first. This is our May 27, 1986 moment as Scott Hall turns up on Nitro, and this young man's turned up on Wrestling with Memories unannounced. And I'm not sure how to react here, but we'll keep it going until the big man turns on you. I'm waiting for a heel turn here. I'm not joking, Wax. I'm waiting for him to knock you into next week, but let's see if it happens or not.
Okay, I'm sorry about that, Fash. Don't worry, I've sorted him out. I've taken him back down to the dungeon, given him a few stretches, and put him back to sleep. So we're good to go.
It's live TV, Wax. It's live TV. As I say, we've had our first interruption from an outsider. Maybe next week, if he shows up again, I'll face him face to face. If he tries to throw a toothpick in my face, there will certainly be a reaction. But we need to keep away from these outsiders. WCW or Wrestling with Memories will fight back against this interjection from our enemies and other podcasting organizations.
Yes, so let's pick up where we were talking. We were just talking about, prior to SummerSlam, the build up to Bret Hart getting to that point, and that bringing in his parents, bringing in his family, really something different to what we'd seen with a lot of people. But I mean, if you go back to his book, and after SummerSlam, despite having a great match, he was kind of bummed out that he'd lost the Intercontinental title, and with that, the prestige and the position on TV that brings. And prior to SummerSlam, we had seen Papa Shango come in, interfere slightly with one of his matches, and that was really the where they were going to post SummerSlam, a feud with Papa Shango. But really, it was kind of lost after SummerSlam. You didn't really see much of him on TV. You didn't really have a big feud thereafter. So again, it just adds to the whole strangeness of him being
Surprise.
the one.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. All they do with the whole Papa Shango Bret Hart thing is just promos against one another.
Mm-hmm.
And Papa Shango essentially saying he's cursed. Bret Hart, the commentator's talking about it. Bret Hart saying he doesn't believe in the curse and he lost just because a better man won. So he's not really even selling it in the promos like our man, the Ultimate Warrior, was. So yeah, I say just back and forth. And we're on the road to Survivor Series, but you can't really see, what's he going to be doing there. And then you're kind of thinking, is Bret Hart lost in the shuffle, which is what you're alluding to? Because initially, there was a talk of a feud with Shawn Michaels for the Intercontinental Championship. If I can get out right, my teeth nearly fell out. but a feud with Shawn Michaels for the IC title. But now he's lost it to the Bulldog. So what happens to Bret next? But what happens, Wax, as we keep saying, is something that no one could have predicted.
Okay, Fash. So let's look at the timeline then. We're moving into sort of the end of September. Bret's had a couple of house show wins over Kamala and Papa Shango. He's had a couple of matches with Razor Ramon as well. One he won, one he lost. And then he actually goes on a little look with Ric Flair around the end of September, beginning of October. And, from all accounts, they put on some really good matches, Ric Flair winning most of them by count out. So maybe that was in, the mind of Vince, that these guys had really good chemistry, but that still wouldn't explain what happened after.
Well, that's what I'm going to ask you now, Wax. Let's get to the crux of the matter. And you can see I've got the match playing in the background. I don't know if you can see or not, but I've got it there. I've moved our wrestling arcade to the side, and we've got this historic moment playing in the background. But why, let's put Bret to one side and, the whole craziness of him becoming the champion on this date. But why did Ric Flair lose the championship? I mean, he just won it a few days after SummerSlam. What's going wrong?
Well, I think the first thing we mentioned a little bit on the previous episode is that Vince was kind of souring on both Macho Man and Ric Flair. And, that match where Ric Flair eventually won had to be redone. I think Vince was, pretty annoyed with that whole outcome. And I was actually watching a Bret Hart interview with somebody, who's talking about him being in the arena at the time, and Vince just, going off his head at both of them. And actually, even after the second rerun of that match, Vince still wasn't happy. And Bret really thinks that soured Vince on Ric Flair and not being able to produce what Vince wanted. And that's certainly, I think, one of the reasons. But that doesn't explain how quickly they moved it. And a lot of this has something to do with an injury that Ric Flair picked up.
Yeah, so I think the interview you might be referring to is the one with Sean Oliver, where Bret says a lot of things. I think he's a 1992 timeline. Now, I would dispute some of the things Bret says in that, but we're not discussing that today. So as you know, wrestlers remember things maybe slightly differently in certain points. But yeah, so going back to it, Macho Man seems to be soured on him, as you say. Ric Flair not too happy with what he's been up to, probably since WrestleMania, when we talked about the Blade job and Vince not being happy. But he's got a championship here. But what Ric Flair says, and what's actually been discussed since by various people, is that Ric Flair was feeling a little bit out of sorts. And what's been suggested is he had vertigo. So he had an inner ear problem. So as we said, the feud that seemed to be really highlighted was going to be the Ultimate Warrior against Ric Flair for the championship. And they actually have a couple of matches on the house shows. Now, I think Ric Flair in the past has said the second match he had with the Warrior was the worst match he's ever had. And the worst one was the first match he had with the Ultimate Warrior. Now, I've seen one of these. I think I've seen the second one now with kind of grainy footage on YouTube. And I don't think it's as bad as, Flair makes out to be. I've seen worse matches, but certainly there's not a chemistry there, similar to him not really having a chemistry with Hogan at this point. Not going to the WCW matches, but supposedly what Ric Flair says is that in the first match, Warrior suplexes Ric Flair incorrectly. He lands on his head, and that then creates these balance issues. And at the time, he doesn't know, but later on, it's determined that he's got vertigo. So he's just not feeling well. He's not coming across well, and they need to get to the bottom of this health issue. And supposedly, at that point, Vince is thinking, I need to take the championship off. And as you say, he's probably soured on him. So at some point, I think Ric Flair is very much a transitory champion here. And he's going to lose the title. We would have thought it's going to be to the Warrior, maybe at the Royal Rumble, get past Survivor Series, but it seems he's had enough. And Vince has also got the pressure, as we'll talk about it in a future episode. The steroid investigation now is in full flow, So he's thinking a lot of different things here, and he's maybe just thinking, look, I need a clean break here, and Rick is not the guy for me. So yes, the Survivor Series main event can be what it is, but I want the championship off him. And now we all know as wrestling fans, once Vince McMahon has an idea in his head, he's just going to do it.
Yeah,
and that's probably one of the reasons that Ric Flair loses the title. The next question then is, okay, Ric Flair taking a championship away from him, who's going to be the next champion? And that's where it got really interesting.
Yeah, and maybe we should discuss, the other options that there were potentially. I mean, from my own mind, when I was going back to think about who could potentially step in here, Bret wouldn't even have made my list of top 3 candidates at this time.
If you go back in 1992, no chance.
Maybe British Bulldog, but that's a stretch as well because he didn't have great promo skills and he just won the IEC title, so there wouldn't have been a reason for him to go on to a world championship run. Shawn Michaels was a heel; it was way too early for him, right? So let's not even consider him. The only other one that makes maybe a little bit of sense is Undertaker, because he was painted as the big, the big guy on WWF TV at that point. He was the big gimmick guy, and was a very popular wrestler at the time. But he was in a feud with Kamala. They could easily have turned that into something with Ric Flair.
Yeah, so
I don't have any other suggestions.
Yeah, let's have, and I'll try and maybe think of it from what their point is, and let's go back. So if we go with the assumption that he's had enough of Flair, and now what we hear later is he wanted to go with somebody who's more of a worker because of the steroid stuff. So if we're thinking logically, the only person that's really in line to be the champion here is the Warrior, right? The Warrior's the guy. But if we're talking about the steroid stuff, then Warrior's not the guy. So he's out, I say, British Bulldog promos, but also another guy that doesn't help with the investigation. So he's out of the picture. So, there's been names mentioned. Supposedly, the rumor mill has been there was 4 or 5 names. And one guy that said that he was actually, it was between him and Bret, was Tito Santana. Your man, do the thing.
Ole! And I would have paid money to see Tito Santana world title.
No chance, right? He still talks about it, and maybe they told him. Supposedly, Pat Patterson said to him that it was between him and Bret, or a few others, right? There's no way in hell that Vince McMahon was going to put the title on Tito Santana, not because he couldn't work and the Hispanic market, but think about it. He was a jobber to the stars. Even with this El Matador thing, he's just losing to everyone. So I'm sorry, Tito, despite me saying it wasn't going to be Tito Santana, but we're going to the workers. Another odd thing Tito Santana said was $1 Million Man was in the hunt. Now, that doesn't make any sense whatsoever either, right? Because he's a heel, he's in a tag team division, and we'll know that he was pretty broken up at this point, and he's going to retire in the next year. So don't buy that. If I'm going with this whole, has to be a worker, some element of loyalty, and it can't be Warrior, and he's soured on Savage, then to me, I think Undertaker, if he wants to just put it on the big bad and the guy who's just as popular as these other people, but then he's this Andre at this point, so maybe he doesn't do that. And then you start thinking, then Bret Hart does come into the equation,
because there's no one else.
And if you think his popularity in Europe and SummerSlam, but the other guy who I think would have worked even better at this point, if you forget about what happens in the future, is Mr. Perfect. And we're going to talk about Mr. Perfect and how he became quite pivotal in future episodes. But the story writes itself.
Well, you're right. If you just take out this match altogether and just run with the story as it was progressing,
it's perfect.
You could have had.
It's perfect. I didn't mean to say, but it is. And I think Mr. Perfect, right, would work in that scenario. The other ones, I was thinking, if he's going to push a young guy and just go with a new direction completely, as odd as it sounds, somebody like Tatanka, who'd came in and he was popular, undefeated, and that would be really out there. But that just goes to our discussion here. Because of the people that have left, and because of this kind of criteria we've set about being a worker, if you're going towards loyalty, then there's in tenure, then suddenly Bret Hart does become the guy. And this is where it's just so odd, because this is just this paradigm shift in the company. Because, just going back a month, 2 months, 3 months, certainly at the start of the year, look at the roster, look at it now, it's just completely different. And Vince McMahon's mindset is just changing completely.
And there's another reason I think that Bret was chosen at this time. They'd just come off a really big tour of Europe.
After SummerSlam, right? So
then in that tour, Bret Hart was very much a fan favorite. They went to Germany and he was getting people coming in from the crowds, just mauling him and just celebrating with him. And he's always been popular in the UK and Europe and obviously Canada and in the US.
This is brilliant, because at this point he's still not that established.
So it just goes to show there's plenty of potential there. And if Vince, we know he's a smart guy, and he's always looking. He's clearly identified that as one aspect of it, and they add a number of tours to the future years off the back of Bret Hart being a champion.
And let's just go one final thing before we move to the next one. But you're talking about names once again. Let's talk about other guys here. Razor Ramon too soon. And he's a heel. Shawn Michaels, I say too soon for him. He's a heel. Crush.
That's
big
the
guy.
one I was going to mention.
But Crush is kind of big, but does it fit into that steroid thing? If you're just going to give him a big push, and then you start once again getting a bit stuck in terms of the names that are there. So you're not going to bring back Rowdy Piper's not coming back in all this type of.
Hey, they could have given Brutus the Barber Beefcake a call, and
well, he's going to come back in February, isn't he? But I think if they give Brother Hogan a call and he couldn't do it, he probably would have put Brutus's name ahead. But that just goes to show when you think of all these names, if you take out the key criteria of it not being a muscle-bound monster, and it's going to be more of a worker than Bret Hart or Mr. Perfect. I still think if you just go and put it in a bubble that moment, then Mr. Perfect made sense storyline wise relative to everybody else if it's not Macho and Warrior. But here we go. It's going to be Bret the Hitman Hart. But did Bret know it was going to be him straight away, Wax, or was it a surprise for him? Just as much as it was for us in due course.
Yeah, so let's refer back to Bret Hart's book in which he talks about, how this all went down. He's made travel arrangements. He's got a show lined up, but he's actually asked to change his ticket and come fly out to Saskatoon, of all places in Canada.
Saskatoon, the first time I ever heard it, and probably the last time I heard Saskatoon mentioned.
Yeah, and then he was asked to fly out and meet Vince immediately, basically, and Vince has no idea what this. Bret has no idea what this is about. And apparently, he has a run-in with Chief Jay Strongbow at the time, who's working backstage, and the chief lets him know, look, he wants to talk to you about the future, etc., etc. But anyway, he flies out, he meets Vince, and he mentions in his book that when he arrives, he just sees Ric Flair leaving Vince's office. They have a handshake, and he sees Ric on the way out, and Bret goes in to actually see Vince. Vince asks him, how long have you been working here now? And Bret says, 8 years. And he realizes it's probably longer than any other active wrestler in the company at that point. And I'll come back to that at the end. Vince thanks him for his dedication over the time, says, he's put every title belt on him that he could over that time. And at this moment, Bret starts to think to himself, am I about to get fired here? Which would be a disaster because his father's coming out to watch a match.
And I can't think that Vince McMahon would do, right?
Yeah, because at this thing, he's probably thinking there's nothing else for Bret to do. And then suddenly Vince says, he intends to put the world title belt on Bret Hart tonight in a match against Ric Flair. And Bret is just so shocked, he's gobsmacked, got no reaction on his face. And Vince is like, you don't have anything to say, smile, be shocked, whatever. And Bret's just, sitting there in dumbstruck silence, really, to think about how this has all come to be. Vince then makes clear there's no longer going to be a champion's limo. There's not going to be a dressing room for the new champion, and not a fruit basket either, which I thought was pretty funny. So I
wouldn't sign up to the title with all these.
Well, I think Bret was just so shocked that he would.
I'm the $1 million fan. I need these things.
You do. But at that point, obviously Bret had no idea until the day of, which is crazy. 12th. Yeah, it's crazy. 12th of October, 1992. Not the best way to do business, but even to this day.
But it shows you, doesn't it, the fact that this is how quickly decisions were being made.
Yeah.
And once again, it's essentially just a house show. It's not being televised. So why would Bret Hart think that anything's going to happen here? It's not even advertised on TV leading up to this. It is just a house show. Stu's there, Helen Hart's there, Saskatoon in Canada. Supposedly Stu was actually originally from Saskatoon rather than Calgary, but they're there, so you can see why it'd be a great moment for Bret. But it's just something at this point, it's so weird what's going on with all these kind of house show title changes. And I know people like Bruce Pritchard have tried to defend it, saying, it was to create excitement. But in this scenario, you can tell it was very they might be thinking about it, but they just pulled the trigger here in terms of this match. Wax, one thing you've done is you've told a very PG version of the the Bret Hart travel arrangement story. I would encourage everybody to go online and get the true story behind his ticket changes and mishaps, but we're not here to talk about that today.
Yeah, maybe another time. And if you've not read Bret Hart's book, then you should, because it's partly detailed in there. Certainly all of his transgressions anyway.
Let's just say he loves Italy. He loves it.
He does. I mean, moving on to, there's another thing about Saskatoon is Bret actually says this was where his first pro wrestling match was as well. So after all that time, back in Saskatoon of all places, full circle.
So Wax, once again, this match has become notorious, one for it not being televised live, but the fact that the whole match was not released even after this, and it was actually in the end released on a Coliseum home video. So we actually probably saw more of the Macho Man Ric Flair match than this one. In terms of the match, maybe the reason behind that was, once again, Rick's talked about his vertigo. You would think a match between Ric Flair and Bret Hart would be a classic. I watched the match again, and yeah, it's not all that, is it? It's a very passable.
I don't know. I think it's not a 5-star match. It's not a great match. You're absolutely right. It's not a great match, and from all accounts, they did put on better matches later on before this. Before, and I think they had a few matches on the house shows after as well, including an Iron Man match at some point that was further down the road.
But then Bret basically said that. I mean, we'll go to that, but I don't know if their matches were like it. Bret certainly badmouthed them, and Rick as well, and said that maybe Ric Flair was intentionally not being the Ric Flair everybody wanted. But anyway, let's put that to the side. Your thoughts on this match? I was obviously a little bit underwhelmed.
I mean, it was
the ending, but
it was a type of match that I would expect Bret and Ric Flair to have in terms of what they were doing throughout. Very believable. They had their own movesets. Obviously, Ric Flair was calling the match, and again, Bret refers to that in his book, saying that he hopes it will be the last time that Ric Flair calls a match between the two, because now he's going to go on and be king. A bit of bitterness there potentially from Bret, and the match itself, Bret actually rolls his ankle very early on.
That's true.
And then he dislocates a finger as well. So things are not going well, and you can maybe imagine that leads to hampering the quality of the match. But
with Rick already having his balance issues, so
yeah,
if you add all that together,
it does explain why it's not the best match. But I still thought, it's a very passable match, very decent of the two, very believable. It was back and forth to begin with. Then Ric Flair starts to take over, throws a lot of chops, and again, Bret is not quite happy with the chops. Something he doesn't appreciate. And actually, a really good comment from him in his book. The only guy more stupid than the guy chopping you is the guy taking them. Going to the fact that wrestling is supposed to look real, but not actually hurt. And the chops are the one thing that do hurt more than.
When in a real fight do you chop somebody?
I don't know, but maybe we should try it in our next time we're in the bar.
Chops should only be lamb, but carry on.
Yeah, there's no standout moment from the match. And
we've got it playing in the background. Wax, we're getting near the end of it, but it's playing in the background. But as you say, maybe no standout moment. But it's more of an NWA vibe. Do you feel it's Ric Flair once again, more that than what you'd expect in a WWF match?
Yeah, maybe? Potentially. And here we go. Bret suplexes him off the top rope, and he takes down his straps a little bit before that, and then he goes for the sharpshooter. Mr. Perfect gets up on the apron. He's going to try.
We're actually at the end of the match.
Yeah, we are. That's it. Don't worry, I'm talking through it. And Mr. Perfect's going to get up, trying to get involved, but the ref, Earl Hebner, who's had a intertwined career with Bret Hart, he's a referee, makes sure that Mr. Perfect doesn't get involved, and Ric Flair taps out.
But even this was weird, right? So let's talk about this. The crowd's going crazy. Nobody saw it coming, but Earl Hebner just shouts at Mr. Perfect and he kind of gets off. But at the same time, Ric Flair's submission's probably a bit quicker than expected. It just feels even this bit is a bit of a botch. What you would probably have imagined was Bret knocks Perfect off the apron or something, but it's literally just Earl Hebner tell him to get it down. And at the same time, Ric Flair's already moving up. One thing I'll say about this match is Ric Flair, to me, deserves respect for really selling everything Bret did.
Yep. And actually, Bret does say that in his book and in the post-match interview. He's appreciative that Rick did the job on this day. Rick probably could have said no, and got away with not losing the title here. But he obviously wasn't well, and he didn't have any issue with Bret Hart really. And Vince asked him to drop it, so he dropped it. And then you can talk a little bit about the post-match interview. He thanks Ric Flair for stepping in the ring with him.
Which is once again a little bit different, right? Because you never thank a heel, but it's so basically, me and Gino Colon brings him out later in the taping. Bret gives a great, kind of really heartfelt promo. You can tell he's speaking from the heart.
Yep.
One thing you've not mentioned is, once again, Stu and Helen are here. So we've got the family angle again, and the celebration. But he basically just talks about his journey very quickly. Thanks Ric Flair for giving him the opportunity, and essentially says that dreams can come true, and this moment is sealed with that. And a crowd which probably wasn't expecting much has actually witnessed a huge moment with a new champion. The next superstars. So on the 17th, suddenly it opens with this interview we're referring to. So check out with me and Gene bringing out the new WWF champion, and it's Bret Hart. And I know, going back in time when I heard about this, and obviously I got the superstars recording after, but everybody was talking about it because it literally stunned everyone when the show opened, because you didn't have the internet. So suddenly the show opens and Bret Hart's your champion, and it makes no sense. But that created a huge buzz.
Yep. I think it did. Apart from you, I think you were probably disappointed that it wasn't Warrior.
You know what?
You said to this day you were disappointed that it was Bret Hart.
I was true at that point. If I go back to my 8-year-old self, initially I was kind of like, wow, Bret is the champion. This is unique. But then I was thinking, why is the Warrior not the champion? So I was disappointed, Wax. But then in the end, it seemed to even I could tell at that young, tender age that something different was going on here. And, this wasn't what was in our mindset in terms of what had happened, and Bret's the champ now. So that was certainly a shocking moment, and I remember vividly the chat in the playground when you were saying Bret Hart's the champion, and you're like, what? And I can imagine you watching that Superstars on a Saturday and being absolutely thrown off, probably fell off your couch at the time.
Yeah, and what I think is great about Bret winning the title, and obviously I didn't know at the time, but the fact that he's had an 8-year tenure with the WWF, he's worked his way from the bottom all the way up to, to earn the respect of fans, of Vince and everybody else in the wrestling industry. 8 years is a long time to wait before winning your first world title. And that made me go away and do a bit of research and a bit of trivia for you, Fash. See if you can give me any of the other names on this list that I've got. But beyond Bret, as in who else had such a lengthy time between starting with the company and winning a world title? Can you think of any names that would maybe match or exceed?
I was going to mention the guy who didn't get the title, who I ripped earlier, El Matador Tito Santana, but he didn't win the title. It's a very good question, Wax, in terms of who would have been.
I'll give you a hint. There was nobody before this point, at least not from.
Yeah, because I was thinking in the Hogan era, right, nobody's going to, because he was around. After this, there's probably obviously Shawn Michaels.
Yep. So Shawn Michaels won after 7 years and 9 months, right? Which again. It's amazing how similar their careers were, for so long. This is
it, and we're going to talk about it in our future episodes, how they are going to now really travel.
And there's several that happened, from maybe 2005 onwards, actually. I wonder if you could think of anybody, but...
after 2002, things start becoming a blur.
Yeah, so for example, we've got... let me run off some names. So Rey Mysterio, 9 years after joining WWF, he won a world title. JBL and Edge, similar times.
Edge deserved it. JBL.
Oh, I don't know. We'll have to come to that. But 9 years and 6 months for both of them, which is pretty shocking. As in pretty long time. Kofi Kingston, 11 years and 4 months. So, that's the longest that anybody has taken to win a world title. And there's honorable mentions for people like Jeff Hardy, Christian, Bobby Lashley, but they all had breaks with the WWF at various points.
But it's very much, I say, a different era, right?
Yeah.
We're talking about the Ruthless Aggression era.
Yep.
And after that, so up to this point, it was really difficult in the Hogan dominated world. So that's great stats, Wax. That's why they call you the brain. So good homework there. Good to see that you're reading Bret's autobiography again, and also looking for some stats. About time you did a little bit more work and basically got to my level when it comes to research.
As I've got a lot of training to do here with the youngster. We're in the dungeon a lot, so
yeah, I don't know if that guy's going to listen to you. He seems like a bit of a loose cannon. But anyway, Wax, so post this match, Superstars, we were talking about the fact that it's announced. What is interesting is, the first title defense isn't going to take place till Saturday night's main event. But he actually had a couple of matches the next night. I think there's a set of tapings, and he took on the Berserker. But there's also a main event for that 4-hour-long taping, which you can find online, and it's Bret Hart, the champion, and the Ultimate Warrior taking on Kamala and Papa Shango. I don't know if you've seen this dark match. If you haven't, you need to check it out. But what I liked about that was, the crowd is obviously a bit fatigued because it was after the end of a 4-hour taping, and they're probably sticking around for the Warrior. But Warrior gets a bigger pop as you'd expect. There's probably still some surprise with Bret being the champ, but Warrior actually comes in, lifts his arm up to kind of endorse him as the champ, and then they have the match. The match, you can watch it, but it's very much Bret doing all the work, and then Warrior just coming in, sweeping, destroying everyone, and winning the match for them. And they have a moment where Bret and Warrior's kind of giving him the title and kind of just holding on to it a little bit. So it's a moment which maybe something could have happened. Unfortunately, it didn't. But those two matches are just after he wins the title. It's things we wouldn't see on television. But then they do announce on the October 24th Superstars, I think, that Bret Hart will defend his world title at the Survivor Series, and his opponent will be Shawn Michaels. So that's where we are in terms of that story. So a whirlwind month really for the Hitman and the WWF. And this is why we call this the most amazing and shocking period in the company's history, certainly up to this point.
Yeah, it's been a great show, Fash. Love talking about Bret Hart winning his first world title. We'll talk a lot about Bret over the coming weeks and months, especially over his 93 and 94 onwards, really coming into becoming the top superstar that we know he would be. Other than that, I mean, what else was happening around here that we'll talk about in future episodes?
Well, the next episode we talk about the one that we've been quite hyped about. But there's something, as we say, running in parallel with this. The Ultimate Maniacs, the main event of Survivor Series. So it's been announced Warrior and Savage against Ric Flair and Razor Ramon. So what was happening over the September, October, and November period with respect to them and this big change that happened? In the next episode, we'll talk about that short-lived but awesome tag team of the Warrior and Savage and why what was supposed to happen at Survivor Series didn't happen. So we're going to talk about the quick rise of this team, but sadly the demise of it as well in the next show. And then after that, we've got other things to talk about as we lead into Survivor Series, what else was happening in the landscape. Various changes are coming, not just here, but elsewhere as well, with people coming and going. And yes, we'll talk about what's influencing everything, the steroid investigation. So lots to talk about. Wax today was obviously a show that we were both looking forward to, and one of the ones that we spoke about way in the beginning, talking about Bret Hart's rise. So really enjoyed having that discussion with you today. So yeah, I think it's time to close off. Hit us with our exit.
I sure will, Fash. Until next time, everybody, I've been Wax. He's Fash, the $1 Million Fan, and this has been Wrestling with Memories.